I would just like to say that you can ask your questions in the questions or chat section. I'll try to answer them towards the end. Now, this webinar is more like a little more like a training, so bear with me because it's got to do with the environment system. Now, the idea behind what is the idea behind having an environment system? The idea is that softwares like COMOSYS have they have a huge amount of settings which work in the background. I'm not talking about 5 or 10 or 15 settings, hundreds of settings, if not thousands. Every little command, every little option which you have works with settings. And these settings are all in the background. And so working with so many background settings can become challenging. So it's to face this challenge, to overcome this challenge, we have something which we call the environment system. And the idea is that we start off with the factory settings, and then we build on top of that so that we can streamline our experience. Now, like I said, this will be a bit like a training. So I'll basically, it'll be like a training which takes you through the file structure, which works in the background. Now, you're all familiar with the face of COMOSYS, but I'm just going to take you to the file explorer over here. Now, in everybody's computer where COMOSYS is installed, you'll have your C drive. And inside the C drive, you will have a directory called program data. Everybody has that on Windows. Now, inside program data, if you come down, you will come to a point where you see Proya software. And inside Proya software, you will have the various versions which you might have installed. The latest version is COMOSYS 2024S. So I'm going to just click on that. And inside this directory, COMOSYS 2024S, you have certain other directories. And if you look at it over here, there's a directory called environments. Okay, so there are other directories as well, some other files as well, but this is the main directory I want to talk about for a bit. Now, if I double click on the environments directory, you see that COMOSYS is shipped with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 environments off the shelf. These are the Australian environment, the default environment, the Russian environment, the Turkish environment, and the USA environment. Now, these are off the shelf. So when you buy COMOSYS, you will receive all these off-the-shelf environments with it. Now, if I were to go inside, just want to say this at this point, that if I were to go inside, for example, the USA environment, you will see that it has a certain structure. There's a directory called catalog. There's a directory called preferences. And if I go inside preferences, then there are several subdirectories. And there are many files over here. But if I were to go into the Australian environment, for example, once again, you will have the same structure. The catalogs directory and the preferences directory with many subdirectories, and then many files under that. So the first thing I want you to note is that these directories all have a common structure, all have the same subdirectories and the same files inside them. It's just that the contents of those directories are different. Now, the first thing which I want to say is that you are not supposed to change these factory defaults, which come under the environments directory. You're not supposed to touch them. You will use them in a different way, which I'm going to show in a minute. But the whole idea is to leave these off the shelf environments as they are, but create copies of them. So what you do is you create copy of the Australian. You can create as many copies if you want of the Australian environment. You can create as many copies as you want of the Russian environment. You can create as many copies as you want of the Turkish or the USA environment. And then you will use those copies to actually work with COMOSYS. So these are the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which come off the shelf, and we will be adding some more in the near future as well. But this is where we start off from. Now, if we, let me just bring this down. And if we go over here to the file menu, and if I go down to the settings command over here, you see that you come up with these with this dialog box, and on the right side we have something called environments. Okay. Now this one, if you look at the bottom over here, you will see those 5 off-the-shelf environments, right? These are the ones we have. Now, what we do is we begin, like I said, we don't change these. We begin by cloning one of them. So let's say you are working with the USA, and you're working with maybe different companies in the USA, and they all use the US environment, but they have slightly different styles. So what you can do is you can create different clones of the US environment. Clone 1 could be for working with one company, and clone 2 could be for working with another company. So let me just do that. So let me say I want to clone the USA environment, the factory USA environment. And when I press the clone button, before I do that, at the top over here, you see just one default, one environment, which is the default environment, and nothing else. But when I clone this one, things will change. So let me just press the clone button. It asks for a name. So I can give it a name USA Company 1, for example. So this will be cloned from the USA environment, but it will be like a copy of the USA environment, but then I can modify that copy. I don't want to modify the original. So I'm saying USA Company 1. Okay, when I press that, it's going to take a couple of seconds, but because it's making a complete copy of all those directories. And then it says environment has been cloned successfully. Okay, when I do that, and then I go to the top over here, and I open this. Before it had only the default option. Now it has the USA Company 1, right? So I can choose that. What does this mean? When I choose the USA 1, it means this. It says, if you read the heading over here, it says environment for new models, which means that every time now I create a new model, by default, it will be based on a clone of the USA environment called USA Company 1. Okay, so let me just set it to that, press OK. So that setting is done. Now, if I go in and say File New, if I just say New, you will see that if I just say New, you can see that it says it's going to be cloned from the environment. It's going to be based on the environment called USA Company 1. So I can give it a name. I can say my USA project, which is now going to be based on the USA Company 1 environment. But I can even change it at this point. But this is basically just giving me the default, which I can use to create it. Now, if I say create, that new project will be created, and it will be based on the USA environment. Now, what does it mean, basing something on a USA environment? What kind of things does the environment include? Now, for that, we need to go back to our directory structure. And let me first show you what happened over here. This is the environments directory, which I showed you before. Let me go one step up. Now, this is the directory which we talked about a few minutes ago. Now, let me show you there's another directory called company. If I open this, here you will have two directories. One was the default, and one is the USA Company 1. So basically, the idea is that all your off-the-shelf environments are located over here, and all the ones which you clone will be located in this company directory. So you could create USA company 1, company 2, Australia company 1, Turkey company 1, Turkey company 2, default 1, default 2, whatever, however many clones as you want. All of them will be under this directory. They will be listed over here. And those are the ones on which you will be basing your new models, right? So this is very important. So let me go into the company one, the USA company one, which I just cloned. And if I double click on that, it has the exact same structure. Now, there's a lot of help available on the contents of these two directories, right? And to do that, I would recommend immediately, let me just bring this down. If you go to the help menu in COMOSYS and you go to documentation, if you do that, it will open up several help files. And one of the help files is called environment settings files used by COMOSYS. This will basically explain all the files and directories used by which are present in the environments folder in a particular environment. So if I just double click on that, it's a PDF file, environment settings used by COMOSYS, and you can scroll down, and it's a very detailed help on all the files which you find under those environments, right? So I recommend strongly, because it's impossible to go through all of these. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what kind of things you can do over here. But I strongly recommend that anybody who's interested in understanding the background work of COMOSYS should really read this help file thoroughly. It'll be of huge help, because it's going to help you set up COMOSYS in such a way that you can maximize your output. All sorts of intelligent settings, all sorts of behavioral settings, the way macros behave, the way the native objects behave, the way the bolts are selected, the way the anchor bolts are selected, the way your design is done, the way your auto presets are created, the way your gratings are created, for example, your rebars, the available rebar sizes, the different materials which are available, all those things which basically work in the background. Your macro limitations file, your minimum fillet weld sizes, your color related files, visibility settings. There's a lot over here. It's impossible to cover it in half an hour. It takes a long time. But I just want to show you that if you go through this file, what it will do is it will explain to you one by one what's going on in the background. So if I were to go back, if I just let me pull this down and pull this one down as well. So if you see over here, I'll just give a brief overview. So over here we have under the USA company one, we have one directory called catalogs. And if I double click on that, you will see that you have these two files with an extension of GDB. These are your database files for profiles and your bolts. So for example, if you're using the American USA environment, then your section database will be composed of the sections which are used in the USA. So whatever I-beam sections or channel sections or angles or other profiles which they use over there, they will be stored in this database, and you can modify this database from within COMOSYS. You can modify it, you can change it, you can make sure that the next time you base a new model on this environment, you will have all the required profiles. Similar is the situation with the bolts. Once again, you have your bolts GDB file, and it contains your the bolts, the washers, the nuts, and the bolt assemblies, etc. So that's very useful to know that these are over here, present over here. Now, for example, if I were to quickly just bring this down for a bit, and I think go to the tools menu over here. If you see over here under the tools menu, you have the profile database and the bolts database. So if I were to click on the profile database, for example, it will bring up tools which I can then use to modify the existing database, add profiles to it, remove profiles from it, basically bring it to a point where I can use it the way I want. But off the shelf, it's going to contain the USA ones. And then I can modify or add stuff. And then I can make sure, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I can make sure that all new projects then are based on this profile database. Similar is the case with the bolt database. Once again, I can add bolts, remove bolts. These are the bolts which are available in the US environment, A307, A325N, A325, whatever, A490. So you can modify, you can add to this, but just showing you that once you do that, then you can later move these to the environment folder, and we'll talk about that. Now, just a second, let me go back in there. Let me go back to that. So these two were basically for the two main databases which we use, the bolts and the profiles. The much bigger directory, which is a lot more involved, is the preferences directory. So the catalogs one has only two files, but the preferences one has many files and many direct subdirectories as well. So there's a basic design subdirectory, there's a custom subdirectory, there's a drawings module, electrical objects, macro settings, macros, mechanical objects, report templates, settings, structural objects, symbols, UDAs. These are the subdirectories. And then after the subdirectories, you have many files under the preferences menu. Now, if I were to quickly go back to the help file, which I was just talking about, this is exactly how it explains everything as well. Let me just go back to the top. First of all, it talks about the catalogs folder, which I just explained. But then it talks about the preferences folder over here. And then it says that the preferences folder has certain directories, the subfolders, and then some files over there. So the subfolders and the files. And then it goes on to explain each of these files and each of these subfolders. So it starts from over here, the project, all the files, the project preferences file. This is in there. Then it categorizes the files used by the finite element analysis engine of COMOSYS. So these two files, additional load combinations and default materials, these are the two files used internally. Then there's a file used for the structural design of connections. Files used by macro for structural design of connections. This is called the material constants file. It's placed under the preferences directory. So it explains it. It gives you a sample example over there. Then this is something we've talked about, files used by macros for deciding on gauge distances. So it explains the structure of that file over here, the sample file, how it is used, what the different variables mean. Then it explains another file called flange bolting distances text, and it gives the format, gives the geometric explanation of the variables in the file. Then it tells you that there are other files which are used for defining geometries of anchor bolts, anchor bars, rag bolts, and shear keys. These are the files used by these commands over here. So these files are anchor bars default text, anchor bolts default text, rag bolts default text, and shear key default text. Then it talks about the design override files. Then this is something we've discussed in other webinars, the auto preset selection files. This is a long list of files. Many of the macros are over here, the macro preset override files, and it explains their function and how they're used for creating auto presets. Then it talks about files giving geometrical data for checkered plate and gratings and expanded metals. So what you can basically see over here is that this particular file will explain, if you just double click on these files from there, you will easily be able to find out how they're used by COMOSYS. So this basically gives you a very nice summary of what these files do. And then after you go through all the files, at the end of the files, it then starts explaining the folders. So if you remember, inside there were certain files under the preferences menu, but there were also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever, 13, 14 folders over there. So then it explains the folders which reside under the preferences folder. Now over here you have the basic design folder, you have the custom macro. The custom folder, for example, is dedicated to custom macros. So whenever you will create your own custom macros in COMOSYS, each custom macro will be located under this directory, and then it further explains what the structure of all those directories looks like, and what kind of files will those contain. So there's a lot, of course. Each one is a topic in its own, and we're doing separate webinars. The whole idea over here for this particular webinar is to understand everything which you can do, basically. So, for example, there's a drawings module subfolder over there. It has all the information you need to create drawings. Then there's electrical objects. There are macro settings. These are the presets with the MPR extension, which we've talked about in other webinars. Then there are mechanical objects. This is the objects directory, which contains preset files for all the objects, like frame objects, bolt objects, plate objects, weld objects. So these are the MPR files for those macro preset files. Then the report templates, then the auto snap and drawing template settings. So lots of stuff to go over here. Then the claddings, for example, the structural objects contains information on claddings and studs. So you can basically read this, and this will give you a very good idea about how the whole system will work. Now, let me just come back over there. Just a second. Yeah. You will also have a separate directory for your user-defined attributes. So if you create user-defined attributes, then they will be located under the UDA directory. If you create, for example, custom symbols, they will be located under the symbols directory. As I said in the beginning, the background is composed of hundreds of files, if not thousands. In order to be able to optimize the software, any software of this size will have this much information in the background, fortunately or unfortunately. But what we are working towards is this ability to give the ability to the user to kind of infinitely customize COMOSYS, so that they can streamline COMOSYS in such a way that whenever they start a project, everything turns into one-click connect. Everything comes down to very quickly just pressing a few buttons, and everything is working exactly the way you want it to work. Now, the only thing what you need to remember is that once so for example, you can make changes. For example, you could go to the fin plate macro and create a few presets over here, right? So you could create a preset called IP300 in the fin plate macro. Now, this one will be located in the model direct. So this is one thing which is important. Whatever changes you make, whatever new definitions you make, whatever defaults you change, whether it is on the drawing side or the modeling side, they will all be saved under the model by default. If you make any changes, and if you're using it directly from the cloned environment, then obviously you're not changing anything. But let's say you make a new preset. So let's say if I were to go to the steel menu and create a beam like that, and another beam like that, and then if I were to maybe, so this is a W16 by 40. If I were to go in and make a fin plate connection for that, and then if I were to modify it, for example, in some ways, maybe I want to use a bigger bolt diameter or whatever. Maybe I use a 1-inch thickness plate, for example. So if I want to make any changes and I want to save it away, so what was this profile? We talked about this, W16 by 40. So if I were to then go and save this away as a preset, and if I say save, and if I just put that name in there, so I saved it away. This preset will be saved only in this model at this point. any changes, any presets you change, any defaults you change, they will always be saved in the model to begin with. But then you can decide whether you want to put this change in your company folders, in your company environment folders. And this is really the whole idea. So for example, I just made this in the fin plate one. What I could do is if I go to my tools menu and I go to my macro defaults over here, I can click on that. And let's say I search the fin plate menu because this is the one I just changed. And if I select that, and if I say open the presets folder, it says, do you want to open the local folder or the company folder? The local one is for this model only, and the company one is the folder, the environment folder on which this model is based. So it is the environment folder of USA company one, basically. So because I know that I've just saved this in the local one, I press the local one. When I do that, I see that this is the preset I just created, W16 by 40. Now, this is only, like I said, available in this particular model only. But if I wanted to move this, if I say copy this, and if I wanted to move this to my environment folder, so if I say open preset folder again, but this time instead of choosing local, I say company, it takes me to the environment folder of USA Company 1, which is a clone of USA. This is the environment folder on which this model is based. Now, and inside it's taken me to the preferences directory, to the macro settings, and it's taken me to the fin plate subdirectory. And over here, I can now paste this over here. If I want, I can paste this one. And the moment I do so, all new models which are based on the USA Company 1 will have this particular preset available. So this is the way you can modify your sections. If you were to just recall, you can modify your section database. You can modify your bolts database. You can modify your native objects like the beams and columns and trusses, and you can modify the presets of native objects. You can modify the defaults of drawing side objects like the viewports and the line thicknesses and all that, colors, etc. The presets of all macros, load combinations, anchor bolts, embedded steel options, gratings, checkered plates, cladding options, rail options, bolt gauge distances, project preferences, general model settings, custom macros which you might have created, which is very important, drawing viewport settings, custom drawing layouts and drawing settings, your custom templates and reports which you might have created, your off-the-shelf annotation settings, your custom annotation settings, your annotation placement settings, your custom symbols, for example, your user-defined attributes. All these you can modify. And when you modify them, they will always be saved in the local model directory. So all you need to remember is that I need to copy these files. If I want to use them only in this model, then I will leave it at that. But if I want all subsequent projects to be based on those files, then I'll have to find those macros or those tools or those native objects from here somehow. And I will need to open the local folder, copy those files, then open the company folder, and basically copy the relevant file to the relevant place. So basically what you will be doing is, if I were to go back in there, Proya software, what you will be doing is basically be copying stuff from your model directory into the company relevant cloned directory. You will never be copying any file to the environments directory. Those are the factory settings, so we do not recommend that you change them. You will always be copying from the model folder to the company environment folder. It's always going to be in that direction. And then all subsequent projects will be based on that. So once again, to summarize, I would love it if you all went through the help file, which I just mentioned over here. It's called the environment settings files used by COMOSYS. It's a pretty decently sized file, and you can go through it very easily. It explains every step. And I strongly recommend that those are users of COMOSYS, they should actually set up their COMOSYS environments. because this is something which will not increase their productivity by 5 or 10%. This is something which will increase their productivity by hundreds of percents, depending on how deeply they go into the environment feature. I'm going to stop the sharing and see if you have any questions.